Okay, everybody. Hey, it's Nels here, ready to start giving you some video. I had some problems with getting the video started tonight. Hopefully, it's all working well. So, I was having some trouble figuring out what to talk about tonight in the live stream, and so I came up with this presentation that I've done in the past, and I think it might be interesting to talk about it a little bit. It's really related to the stuff I've been talking about the last few live streams, which is the storytelling stuff. And so I'm going to essentially talk about a little bit more that's related to storytelling, and really this concept of personal goals. Now, the idea of personal goals, it comes from the writing of Alan Cooper. Alan Cooper wrote a really great book. He was a UI designer. He created the what is it called? Interaction design. He created the concept of interaction design, a company called Cooper Interactive, and he also was very famous for having invented Visual Basic, which I don't know if you're familiar with Visual Basic, but back 20 or more years ago, it had a fully different way of interacting with the user. The user interaction was totally different from any development environment, software development environment that had come before it. It did things, well, it probably was actually similar to some, maybe like a small talk environment or something like that, but not something that was common in the consumer level development environments. And so it did things like automatically saved all your files. You never had to save anything in Visual Basic. And it had all kinds of power, and it had this really nice interactive development environment, things like that. He developed that, and he sold it to Microsoft, made a lot of money. But in the course, he learned a lot about how computers and software should work, and he created this discipline called interaction design, and he did a bunch of stuff related to interaction design. Anyway, one of the things in his book, which I highly recommend, the book's called The Inmates Are Running the Asylum, and I'll put a link to it in the notes down below. But one of the really great concepts was this idea of personal goals. And he differentiated those from practical or business goals. And he said that what really drives engagement with an application is whether the user achieves personal goals. To some degree, engagement comes from achieving practical goals as well, but personal goals turn out to be much more important. And in particular, if you ignore personal goals, then people are not satisfied with an application or any kind of product. It doesn't have to be software. If they don't achieve personal goals, they're not going to be satisfied. And there's actually another whole really interesting aspect that he doesn't really talk about so much in the book, but that it's really important to us as product managers, which is that personal goals are also really important for creating good stories that we might want to use for go-to-market. And I'm, as you know, very interested in the concept of go-to-market and how product management has to be very involved in go-to-market. Go-to-market, of course, being the part of the product lifecycle where we tell the market about our solution. We've come up with a solution to a problem that we've validated. There's people out there that are willing to pay money for the solution. We create the solution, then we take the solution to market. So we have to tell the people that have this problem that we have a solution, and we have to convince them that our solution is a better alternative than their other options. So that's what we really do as product managers. And so it turns out that personal stories are a really important component of the go-to-market. In fact, really, personal stories are an important component of all the different stages that we go through in product management, whether that's finding and validating market problems or creating the solution. And the reason we need to know personal stories or to hear them and to reiterate them during the finding and validating a market problem is that if you don't hear personal stories of, or if you don't hear stories of personal goals not being achieved by the various people out in the market, then it may be that the problem is not a bad enough problem for you to make money by solving it. So that's one aspect where you want to hear stories about personal goals that were not achieved to help validate a market problem that you might be looking at. You also want to be able to tell those personal stories or those stories about personal goals not being achieved when you're trying to convince your development team to create a solution to the problem that you found. And one of the reasons to use those stories is because it helps the development team recognize that part of the solution needs to include paying attention to those personal goals and making sure that the users achieve them, in addition to the business goals and the practical goals. So let's get into a little bit of slideware on this topic. Let me find where my slides are. Got all these windows open, and I have to switch around between them. So let me do this. Turn that off. So the sort of overarching concept of this presentation is really about how do you get these personal goals, these stories about personal goals. And so I have some guidance on that. I also talk a little bit about why they're so important. Now, just a quick introduction to myself in case you are new to the channel or something like that. My name is Nils Davis, as it says down below me right there. I am the author of the Secret Product Manager Handbook, which is a book about what is product management. And I actually talk about personal goals as one of the chapters, one of the key components of go-to-market. So the book is organized in the structure that I just talked about, which is we have to find market problems and validate them. We have to create solutions to those problems, and then we have to take the solutions to market. Now, this book treats each of those as more or less equals, but one of the things that I also mentioned in the book is that finding market problems is the most important thing we do as product managers, and if we don't do a good job of finding market problems, doesn't matter how good our solution is or how well we take it to market, the product will probably not succeed. And then the next most important thing actually is the go-to-market component, because you can actually, if you find a good problem, you can sell your solution even before you have the solution if you do good go-to-market. Now, eventually, of course, if you're an ethical person, you want to have a good solution to the problem. But it turns out that many people have gotten rich by selling solutions that they didn't have because they found problems that were so severe that people would do anything to solve the problem or to think that they were going to get a solution. Anyway, that is that's the nature, that's the importance of this structure, right? Finding market problems, most important thing. Creating solutions, very important for long-term success, but go to market, really, really critical, and probably secondary only to finding the problems in the first place. So let's now talk about personal goals. And one of the things, again, about personal goals is that they reflect, if they're not being achieved, those personal goals, they reflect potentially reflect a market problem, or they're a symptom of a market problem. And if they are achieved, then that is something you can use to indicate that your product is actually doing something good. So the personal goals, and this is roughly the way that Alan Cooper described them in the book, The Inmates Are Running the Asylum. They're about the customer or the user. They're not about the product or the job that the product is doing. So imagine you're thinking about a product that does accounting. So a very simple concept for a product. And so the product's job is to do a good job of accounting. So it's going to have a general ledger. It's going to have places where you put money in and places where you show that money went out. And maybe you can do invoicing and billing and various things, right? So there's all the different components of the job of doing accounting. So a software product that does accounting. But the user's interaction with that product can be good or it can be bad. And we all have experienced, hopefully, both of those things, good interactions. And unfortunately, there's lots of bad interactions out there. So I'm confident you've experienced those. But the personal goals achieved is more related to the user's interactions with the product. So, for example, if the product, say it's an accounting product, and one of the things you expect maybe from an accounting product if you're a user is that you can enter a value once and it shows up in different places as it should, right? If I write a check for someone, then that number should go onto a check, and it should also be debited from my account or something like that. Excuse me while I take a little drink. And so you expect all those things to happen. Well, what if the accounting software doesn't do that and makes you actually enter that value in all the different places it should appear? Well, it's kind of dumb. It would be a failure of an accounting software. But in particular, it's really annoying to the user because it makes the user do a tedious thing that the computer should do for him or her. So it becomes annoying. So one of the things that that's a very simplistic example, but there's lots of examples like that in products out there where they make the user do something annoying that really the computer should handle or the product should handle, whatever type of product it might be. So another way to have the product fail to deliver on personal goals is if it allows you to make mistakes that then make you look stupid in front of your boss. So a good personal goal is to not look stupid in front of your boss. And a product that violates that or that does not allow the user to achieve that is not probably going to be successful. And if you think about when you're looking for market problems, one of the symptoms of a market problem is, oh, I try to do this process. It takes me 5 hours every week. And often I end up making mistakes. Sort of, I know they're my fault, but they're also mistakes that the system should prevent me from doing. And so I end up looking dumb in front of my boss like once a month. Well, that's a symptom right there of something that needs to be solved. There's multiple things going on in the little story I just told that are about things that are going wrong. One is, well, it takes 5 hours. So that's maybe something that could be automated right there. That's because if you make it shorter, then you achieve a business goal because it's in the interest of businesses to have processes take less time. But if you fix it in such a way that the user doesn't look stupid, that is also going to meet the goal of the user, and so it's going to make them feel better about the solution. So that's an example. On the other side, achieving a personal goal can be about a good outcome, right? I want to get a promotion. I want to get promoted sooner. So if this software helps me get promoted sooner, that helps the user achieve a personal goal. Or maybe if they get recognized as an expert because they get to learn how to do something new and interesting and valuable, that's another example. So those are some examples of personal goals. Well, what aren't personal goals? Well, as I have sort of said, it's business goals or the thing that the software does as kind of its job. So doing a good job of accounting is not a personal goal. That's a business goal, or you might call it a practical goal of this business accounting software. The personal goals are more related to the person feeling good about using it, not being frustrated, advancing in their own interest. Also, enabling me to do my job better may or may not be a personal goal. It's on the cusp. That may really be a practical goal because if they're already doing their job fine and this allows them to do it 10% better, that's probably not going to be super meaningful. One of the characteristics of personal goals is that they are sort of emotionally laden. So you can imagine, or you can sort of see that from all the examples I gave about, for example, the not being made to look like an idiot, not having to do repetitive and tedious things, being promoted, becoming an expert. Those are emotionally compelling results for the person doing the work. And so one of the ways to think about personal goals maybe is that those are emotionally compelling outcomes, whereas business outcomes typically are not emotionally compelling. Increasing sales by 10%, while very valuable for the business, most people in the business are not going to be that emotionally driven by that goal. They'll be happy and they'll know that it's a good goal and they'll rationally feel like that's a really good outcome, but they're not going to be that emotionally invested in it. Maybe if it's a sales manager and that's the difference between keeping his job and not, then they might be emotionally invested. But that's because it's about the job and about the person keeping their job. It's not about the actual improvement in sales. There's some numbers that are emotionally compelling, and we won't get into that, but I talk about it in the last week's video actually. But that's a distinction. So let's try to drill down into why anybody like me would talk about this problem of personal goals and the fact that we often fail to find them and elucidate how our software helps address personal goals or helps people achieve their personal goals, and why often, in fact, our software or our products fail to do that. And the reason is really that as technologists, now I put all product managers into the world of technology. In fact, anybody who's building a product is a technologist. We're all using technology to solve a problem, and most of us have come into this world because we love technology. And we also tend to be engineering types, or we're technical types. So we have this logical outlook on the world, and we are very convinced about how powerful our outlook is. We love the idea of giving you good reasons to buy the product, and we want those reasons to be very concrete and kind of numerical and technical and things like that. We love the rationality there. And we think that think of our customers as making decisions in the same way that we think we do. Now, the reality is that we actually don't make decisions rationally, because we're human beings, and human beings have a lot of stuff going on besides rationality. And so one of the things we have to do is we have to get out of our own self-image in order to find things that are actually going to work. And in fact, if you think about any situation where maybe you've bought something, you've watched somebody be successful selling something, or be successful getting people excited about a topic, and if you analyze that and go back to it, you're going to notice that there were stories involved, and there were emotionally laden components to whether it was a pitch or whether it was a story or something like that. And the facts and logic, if they're there, are used as an adjunct to that. In fact, the fundamental rule of persuasion that you can use as a rule of thumb is that people make decisions emotionally, and then they justify the decisions rationally. And that's, again, where these personal stories, personal goals achieved, and the stories about those come in. So we think that people are driven by this rational decision making. So we talk about the concrete or rational business goals that they've achieved, or the practical goals, and we often avoid talking about the non-rational things. I mean, this is just something that we've actually also been trained to do this in academia and science. We've been trained not to talk about these emotional things like personal goals achieved. And that means that we're leaving a lot of value on the floor typically. Now, this is not everybody, obviously, but this happens a lot. And I see it all the time when I'm watching presentations done by, for example, my colleagues, my product management colleagues, or even salespeople often I see do this, where they talk about the technology and they talk about rational things, and they fail to incorporate the stories. And it does mean that they are less effective, and you see it over and over again. And I see it over and over again in my colleagues. So the reality, though, is that our buyers aren't purely rational, of course. I already talked about they have emotions. And in order to get them to make a commitment, you have to get an emotional buy-in. And the way that you do that is with stories, typically about personal goals achieved, which is a little bit of an awkward phrase, personal goals achieved. I kind of like saying it, but it is a little bit awkward because you have to sort of parse out what the syntax there is. But the fact is that good salespeople have always had this adage, right? That people don't buy products or companies; they buy people. They buy from people. That's what good salespeople know, and the way that you complete that story is with these kind of personal goals. So, why are personal goals the solution to this problem or this situation where we're rational, but we need to make this emotional connection? Well, they make good emotional connection. I already talked about the fact that business goals are not that emotionally compelling. I've talked about that also in the previous last week's video. I talked about that quite extensively. So you can go back and look at that. I'll put a link down below in the notes here. But the fact is that all too often, particularly in high-tech companies, we don't use those stories for doing this kind of marketing. We focus on the practical goals that businesses achieve. And I mentioned, like, your product helped me improve my sales by 10%. Well, again, that's not a very emotionally compelling story. And so we really want to be using stories that are more emotionally compelling. Now, that's a logical thing to say, but if you can say, your product helped me get a raise because I was able to increase sales by 10%, that suddenly I now want to buy that product, or maybe you want to buy that product. But I think you can probably even hear in the difference between those two, just one sentence, and they're not even a full story, the difference in power between I got a raise because of your product because it helped me raise sales by 10% versus I loved your product was really good because it helped me raise sales by 10%. There's just a world of difference between those two, and that's just one sentence and not even a full story. And you can, if you dig down on that, you can find out that not only did he keep his job, but his job was in jeopardy. So it's the full story, maybe something like this, and this is still a simplified version. My job was on the line. We were missing quota every quarter for the past year. And then I brought your software in. And now not only are we beating quota and sales are growing by 10% quarter over quarter, but I got a promotion. So that's a much better story. And that's what's underneath there. So I've talked a lot about telling these stories. So you really want the story behind the personal growth. You really want the story behind the business results. So how do you use these things? Well, you use them in marketing, you use them in sales. You also use them with your developers often. You also use them in pitching new ideas. Now, I don't have those on this slide, the dev and pitching new ideas, but those are really important places to use these kinds of stories. Now, I actually interviewed somebody. I was doing some market research for somebody who is a product management consultant, and I asked one of his customers what were the outcomes of working with this guy, and he said, well, before Mike, that's the guy's name, before Mike came along, I was having trouble sleeping at night because of the stress of his team not being effective and this and that. And Mike came in, trained his team, got his team much more effective, and now he sleeps through the night. Now that was one of the best. That was one of the best stories I ever heard from a customer about a personal goal achieved. Because we all want to be able to sleep through the night, and in particular, we want to be able to sleep through the night if it's our job that's keeping us awake. And so, I thought that was really great. But it's a great example. And so you could use that story in all kinds of different contexts for marketing, for sales, to convince people that, hey, if you want to be successful, Mike is the guy to talk to because he's going to fix this problem like he did for this person who couldn't sleep, right? That's the way that you use these stories. And of course, if you have a product instead of a person like Mike, you use it differently. So you can use them in sales as well. You can often tie the rational story in with the personal story, as I've gotten the example here. The team this person got a raise because their team was so much more productive. And so that ties a personal goal achieved, which is getting a raise, with a business goal. So the next question is, how do you, sorry, I went too fast. How do you find these personal stories? Well, typically when we're out there interviewing customers, like for a success story or something like that, we will often focus on the business goals that are achieved. This is something that, again, those are interesting, but we're often not asking the questions that are going to lead us to the personal goals that have been achieved. And the fact is that those stories are usually just sitting right there. In fact, I think there's probably actually a lot of interviews where we've gotten some glimmer of those stories and we just cut those and we leave them on the floor. Not me. I don't do that anymore. And we instead focus on the business goals. And then our success stories sound like all of our competitors' success stories, and there's no differentiation and no emotional engagement. So it's a problem. But the types of questions you can ask, I've got listed out here. So one of them, for example, this is actually a personal goal achieved about your product, right? They may say, or you may ask them about, have they tried to solve this problem before that your product now solves? And they might say, we tried a bunch of different solutions, and every one of them was terrible, and they were so bad that after I did this twice, my boss said he was going to have to let me go if I didn't actually find a solution to this problem. So there's a personal goal, keeping your job. So they might have had low expectations. And so even just if you say, my expectations were really low about this product solving my problem. And then I was so amazed when it came, you came in and within a day, You had actually showed that you could do all the things we needed, plus a few other things. And so that's an example of a personal goal achieved. Some low expectations, and my expectations were exceeded. So was there a problem that had personal impact? I left a company name in here accidentally, but was there some problem that this person was suffering from, having to work extra hours, having to work on weekends, not getting home to see his kids play baseball, the example I always use, because they had to work late every day, but now they can get home. Or did they have a bad experience with a competitive product? Do they talk about their success in personal terms, like the now I sleep better at night, or I'm much less stressed? Did their reputation or standing in the company change? So this is an interesting one. This is an example not from Initas, but a different company that I talked to, where the person, after implementing the solution, said, not only did the solution really work, but now other people in the company come to my group because we're the experts on how to do this because of what you did for us. So that's a really great personal goal achieved, right? Is becoming the expert. So also, then there's always the eliminating annoying, tedious, or error-prone work. That's a question you can always ask. So what are some of the challenges? Well, one of the challenges is if you can't get permission to tell the story. Well, one thing you have to do is you just have to ask. I think I'm missing a slide here. Sorry to say. I have the same slide twice. There used to be a slide that said the first thing to address in this challenge is to ask, because you certainly are not going to get permission to use the story if you don't ask. Sometimes you don't get permission, but often you do. It's surprising. Particularly smaller companies are often willing to go on record with people's names. But you also might be able to, if you can't get the company name or the full name of the person, you can use the first name of the person. You can use the industry of the company, and that will often be fine. And in particular, if you're using it for a broadcast type of purposes or for marketing or something like that, or you can fully anonymize it if you get the good quote. Sometimes you can just paraphrase what they said and not necessarily say that. So I've got a couple of examples here. Joe B., very happy user at a large consumer product company, said this great thing about our product. And you can also use that for doing a sort of a trial close by saying, hey, would you like to hear more about Joe's story? I can tell you more details if we get on the phone, and I can show you a demo of how Joe used our product in this certain way to solve this specific problem. And those types of things are things you can totally start doing. So I wanted to have this little talk about the value of talking about personal goals achieved. And let's see, go back to this guy. And that's it for today's video. I don't have some of my usual end cards and things. So, if you like this show, if you like this video, please leave me a comment, click the like button, feel free to subscribe, and there's all those links down in the show notes as well. I highly recommend The Inmates Are Running the Asylum, the book by Alan Cooper. You'll learn a lot, and hopefully it'll help you think about how to make better products. I think he's inspired a lot of people, including me. And take a look at some of the other videos, which I'll also list, that talk about the power of storytelling and things like that. So this is Nils Davis signing out. Until next time, again, I'm here every Monday night at 7:30. And until next time, be good at making products.